Hey guys, welcome back. Let's take a break with Stephen Shamus.
Welcome back, everybody. Good to see you again, Alex.
Always
This is part 2. We're going to go back in time, like the Huey Lewis song.
1.21 gigawatts. Great Scott!
Oh,
Good cultural reference there.
I guess.
This is the 1990s part 2.
Yep.
So this is big. We only had a certain amount of time for part 1. Now we got part 2. I think the first part was a lot of fun. It took you in a range of G-rated Bone, Deadpool, some Batman, some Harley Quinn stuff, some War Machine stuff. So what do we got on tap for today, Alex?
Yeah, we're gonna keep going with the 90s. We might be a little bit more Batman, some New Mutants. We're definitely gonna hit the independents today. Some Goon, maybe Preacher, Sandman, maybe even Sonic the Hedgehog.
Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yeah.
Alex, where'd you get that one from? Please. Where'd you pull that one out of? The next book that I want to talk about is something that we touched on a little bit in the last episode.
Mm-hmm.
When we talked about the 90s were the times of the big guns and the big this and the monster uniforms. and in 1990, we had a character called Cable.
Yeah.
What was interesting is Josh Brolin pulled double duty.
Yeah.
Thanos and Cable.
Yep.
Right? 2 completely different characters, by the way. And Josh really figured out a way. You know, when they first announced him, I said to myself, well, are people going to think that they're looking at Thanos, right? But remember, you know, there was so much CGI with the Thanos character that you can tell that it's Josh's face. Yeah. But Josh pulled it off. He pulled off both characters at no time where you're like, oh, that's Thanos, right? Like sometimes plays your mind plays tricks on you. And that character has really, again, another character that has resonated, that has stood the test of time, 30 years already, right? The New Mutants number 87, again, not a short printed book.
Nope.
That book was very, very popular at the time. That was a Liefeld book, you know, so he was the one drawing it. There were 1,695 blue label 9.8s. There were 301 yellow label 9.8s and 3 and 2 of the 9.9s. And that book consistently sells for $400 to $450. I did see a bunch of those get signed by Josh when we had him at our Seattle show. That was really, really great. So talk to us a little bit about the Cable character and how it came to be and what his place is in the Marvel Universe.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it was big guns, big pouches, 90s. So, you know, when he bursted onto the scene, that classic cover, and that's a homage cover as well. Him with the gun, and then the targets of the New Mutants on the side. And Cable's one of those characters that, you know, he was first produced in New Mutants, but really he's an X-Men character, and he's been in the X-Men books for a very long time. I mean, Scott and Jean's son, you know, he's got that heritage. He's been back. He's been Nathan Summers, back to being Cable. You know, he's just one of those characters that people love to see in books and, you know, time travel. And he was in the animated series as well. Again, the 90s, you had the animated series, which was huge. Everybody was watching the X-Men cartoon. And when he popped in and he was time traveler, that when it got kind of like, oh, this is a serious cartoon. This is getting a little nuts.
And I'll tell you, you know, he did such a great job in the film. You know, when he first appears, again, like in the comics, you don't know, is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Is he stirring up trouble? Is he there to save the day? And it's interesting how the character plays out in the film and then interacts with Domino and then Deadpool himself. So that was a fun movie, and it was fun to see Josh play that role in that movie because he obviously did a great. He was jacked up for that too. Oh my goodness gracious. Jeez. So now I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about some indie titles, and we're going to talk about a few of them. We touched on a little bit last time because the 90s really definitely spurred on sort of this indie self-publishing generation, whether it was Image Comics, right? And then you saw, like we talked about last time with Jeff Smith and Bone. So let's talk a little bit about some of these independent titles that have sort of endured that started back in the 90s, which was part of this movement
Yeah.
away from, oh, you couldn't have a hit title unless you worked for Marvel or DC.
Correct.
Because remember, before 1990, that's pretty much how it was.
Marvel, DC. Yep.
That was it. That was
Archie.
it. I mean,
Yeah.
right. 1992, when Image started, pre-1992, it was not really possible to kind of get your stuff out there. So the first book I want to talk about is The Goon.
Now I'm gonna learn you boys a thing or two about Eternal Bleed.
Yeah.
Misses the cutoff by 1 year, 1999.
Right.
That book is impossible to find. So it's going to be a little bit tricky to price it. There are 57 blue label 9.8s. There are 7 yellow label 9.8s. Eric Powell did a great job. Very unique style.
Very much. Yeah.
It's funny. Every time Eric does a variant cover that's not the Goon, you could tell in 2 seconds that's an Eric Powell cover.
Yeah.
Like an Eric Powell cover when you see it. And that book sells for $275 to $300. Talk to us a little bit and let the fans out there know a little bit. What is the character of the Goon? Who is the Goon?
It's going to be a little bit hard to explain, but the best way to explain it is a rockabilly comic about a man who keeps his territory by making sure there's no zombies and other monsters terrorizing the town.
When was the last time you used the word rockabilly?
Exactly. And
I gotta get my dictionary out, Alex. Rockabilly.
I mean, and the Goon is definitely, it's Eric Powell kills it with this book. It's really his baby.
It's his book, right.
It's a funny kind of monster mash with a little bit of like mobsters in there. Like you get a little bit of everything. It's funny when you look at cartoon books and Bone, and he was self-publishing. The Image picked it up, and then they continued the run, and they reprinted the first issues. I mean, when the Goon came out, Eric Powell was with Avatar. He did 3 issues, and then wasn't really into the quality of the books. So he waited. His contract expired. Then he started self-publishing, and that's when it really took off. And he's been self-publishing this book for years.
Yeah, I love when he does variant covers on other stuff like the monster variant covers.
Yeah. Awesome.
He has such a unique style to him. Again, it's very, very hard. There's so many artists out there. There's so many illustrators out there. And how do you make your mark? How do you differentiate yourself? You have a guy like Humberto Ramos. A Ramos cover when you see it. There's a new artist, Alexander Lozano, who's been doing a lot of Iron Man stuff. His stuff is fantastic. And he's starting to create a name for himself where he's very identifiable by his unique style. Obviously McFarlane and stuff. So, Tim Sale we just talked about too. So Eric Powell is one of those guys who has a very, very unique style. Love his work. And he does the monster stuff great. Like his monster stuff is great. So another independent, which was just a film, which actually was a huge hit, 1991, Sonic the Hedgehog, came out from Sega.
Yeah.
The book is almost impossible to find. There's only 17 blue label 9.8s, 0 yellow labels. I don't know who would sign it. Even in a 9.6, that book sells for $300. I don't know that you'll see a 9.8 for sale anywhere. What that book 29 years ago, and now there's a feature, film. How did that character go from Sega to the big screen?
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody, if I mention Sonic the Hedgehog, everybody knows who that is. It's like Mario. You know who Mario and Luigi are. It's one of those things when the 90s and the video game systems were so big, and they started, a lot of these game companies, Sega and Nintendo, started pushing their characters out there because they wanted to make merchandise and cartoons and TV shows and the whole thing. Comics you would want to say that Nintendo probably has the most longevity of still puts out systems, still puts out lots of games, where Sega kind of just closed shop with the putting out the systems and just worked on their characters and their video games. But when you look at something like comic books, the Mario comics did not last long at all. They were the early Valiant stuff. I don't think it lasted more than a year, but the Sonic comics from 91, they lasted until Archie let go of the license. Like there was almost 200 plus comics. That's a long time for a video game character. And like I said, I mean, in the 90s, Sega was huge. It's funny when you're like, oh, Sonic the Hedgehog comics, that's an Archie comic. Like Archie's put them out for so long. You would never think that Sega and Archie would be together, but here we go. And the Sonic comics still to this day are very popular. I believe IDW has them now.
Got it. So the next indie book Terry Moore, Strangers in Paradise. Again, when you think of Terry Moore, that's what you think of.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the first thing that comes to your mind. 1993, Strangers in Paradise, #1. Only 7 blue labels, 5 yellow labels, so they're very, very low print runs. It's impossible to find. 9.6 will sell close to $1,000. Talk a little bit about the storyline and what was it about it that was groundbreaking 29 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Terry Moore created this comic. The 2 main characters were women in the 90s, and about their relationships with themselves, with men. It was essentially it's a romance comic. I mean, if you want to label it, it's way more than that. It's not just a romance comic. It's way more. It's a brilliant piece of art. But I mean, in the 90s, you have this Terry Moore making this romance comic, and it took off because the story resonates not just with who you would assume read romance comics. And Terry Moore, to this day, if you go see him at a convention, there's so many people stopping and talk to him about this book and every book. You know, it's one of those books that when I was working in the shop, you know, people would come in and go, "Oh, we don't read comics. You know, we're not really into superheroes. What should we pick up?" Try Strangers in Paradise. I mean, it's a perfect non-superhero book, especially not from the big 2, that I think people can get into. And again, black and white for years.
Yeah, I will tell you, when I was working at the magazine at the time about comic books, we had several women in the office, and that was the first introduction to comic books that a lot of females had at the time. Today, there's a lot of books for females.
Oh, yeah.
But if you go back to 1991, there really wasn't. And that was an entry point book for a lot of females into the marketplace that a lot of the companies were not satisfying. And Terry Moore, you know, the women in the office, they loved Strangers in Paradise.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was very cool. So the last real independent book from the 1990s, you know, it was independent, but it wasn't. It was an Image title, and it turns out to be one of the biggest Image titles, just past its 300th anniversary issue. Huge milestone. The guy is a megastar. He was a megastar on SpiderMan. He was a megastar on the Hulk. Produced some of the most classic artwork from the 90s, even still today. Owns a toy company. He's doing some great DC toys. And that's Spawn.
This summer, evil has a new enemy. Justice has a new weapon. And the world has a new hero. Spawn.
And they printed millions of copies of the regular #1. So I don't really want to talk about those because those are so commonplace.
Yeah.
But there are 3 versions that we really should talk about of Spawn. First of all, there was a newsstand version, which is not easy to find. Again, as we talked about the last time, CGC does not differentiate between the newsstand and the direct market, but it's obvious based on the millions of copies that were pumped into the direct market. People didn't really have to go to the newsstand to find the book. They could find that book everywhere. And the newsstand books, as you remember at the time, they were on the spinner racks. So those books got manhandled.
Yep.
So finding 9.8s of the newsstand version are very, very, very difficult. So even though there's not an exact count on how many newsstand versions are on #1, the #1 newsstand 9.8s consistently with the barcodes sell for about $1,000. And they just don't come up that often. So people know, even though they don't know how many there are, they know there's just not a lot of them, simply because you can't find them. And even if they printed a lot of them, again, being on the spinner racks, the second somebody from a newsstand takes them out of a box and puts it on a spinner rack, they're not 9.8s anymore.
Right, yeah.
They're just not. You know how they and back then, they would just throw them on there. I mean, they would literally just throw them on the shelf.
It's like
nobody cared. And then in 1997, they released a black and white version, totally new cover. They apparently didn't make that many of these covers. There's 82 blue labels, 59 yellow labels, and that book sells for $1,500.
Yeah.
And that's basically a reprint.
Yep.
That came out 5 years later.
New cover.
The last one, great cover. The last one, which is interesting, which CGC has not considered an error variant yet. They give it a qualified label. But there was a manufacturing error where the book was not printed with black ink.
Right.
They are very, very rare and very hard to find. And even though they have a qualified label on them, the books do sell for a huge premium, are considered very rare. And I do wonder over time if CGC will change its stance on the book. You know, in baseball cards, a good equivalent was there was a Frank Thomas rookie card in 1990 where it's called No Name on Front, where the black ink did not print his name. It's the same sort of manufacturing error. That card sells for thousands of dollars. It's considered a legitimate error. It's not a qualified card in any way. I do wonder if CGC will change its stance on Spawn, on the non-black ink one, because I do think it's a manufacturing error. I agree with their stance, but I don't think it should get a qualified grade. I think it should get a regular, regular blue label grade. So obviously Todd has been very influential, one of the most influential artists of the entire generation. And we're going to talk about another one of his books right after we get done with Spawn.
Yes.
So do you want to take us through where he went from leaving Marvel and then starting Spawn and what that spawned?
Yeah. I mean, when you talk about Image, especially in the 90s, I mean, it's a little different today. But I mean, all the big hitters, Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, Eric Larson,
Jim Valentino.
Yeah, I mean, the list goes on. Will Spartaccio, yeah,
and Mark Silvestri.
That's it. Yeah, yep. When they left and started Image, and those books came out, I think Spawn and Savage Dragon are the only ones still going, and that says a lot. Eric Larson does Savage Dragon all by himself. He doesn't. I mean, he writes and draws. Todd, I believe, has some help. Sometimes he does some interior. Sometimes he does some writing. Sometimes he does some plotting. Sometimes he does some inking. He does a little bit. But I mean, as a cultural person, Spawn being a comic book that was a African American at the time, and then was optioned for a movie as a superhero, which was huge with John Leguizamo. I mean, that movie, I don't know anybody that grew up in the 90s that didn't see the Spawn movie. And again, the character still to this day is going on. We used to get people in the shops all the time that could come in, oh, I don't really read comics, but man, I love that Spawn movie. There's still Spawn comics? Yeah, there's still Spawn comics here. To grab this stuff, grab it. And again, you take the best of both worlds. It's kind of a Spider-Man, Batman mishmash with a big flowing cape. It's still to this day stands the test of time.
Right. So I think if you could find some of those rarer editions, and the other interesting thing is Todd, he does the CGC signature series usually once a year or so. And you know what? If you have a Spawn one, it always sells. That book always sells in 9.8. Go get yourself a signature series with Todd. It displays beautifully. It's a great book. That leads us to another Todd book.
Yeah.
This one is the
Todd
book.
Yeah.
The Todd book. Spider-Man #1, 1990. Cover is iconic. My dad owned the original art, sold at Heritage Auctions, 2012. He told us at the time when he sold the artwork to my dad, he said, you could follow every line of webbing on the entire cover. And up until that point, you had never seen webbing like this.
Right.
Who knows how long it took him to do that? Can you imagine? By hand, there were no tablets.
Yeah.
There was no Photoshop doing this and that. It was hand.
Yeah.
Alex, this was by hand. And you know how many webs are shooting out of there.
Jeez,
he said you could follow them all. And that book, that cover was so iconic and is still iconic to this day. And I don't want to talk about the millions of copies of the green and the bag and the poly bag and the newsstand and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. There's really 3 versions of the book that are the versions of the ones that people really want to look after. So the first one is the Gold UPC. Interesting story with the Gold UPC. It was a book that was released only in Walmart. It was considered a second print. And again, we've talked about newsstand versus regular. For whatever reason, and I think it's because it was known even at the time, CGC did break out the newsstand version as a separate book, because even back in 1990, it was a book people were looking for. I remember. People were trying to go to Walmart to find this gold cover. Aesthetically, the gold cover, to me, looks nicer than the silver cover. I don't know why. It just displays nicer. And the second prints that they sent to the hobby shops had the little Spider-Man head in the corner. And only the ones that they sent to Walmart have the UPC code on them. And again, going back to the spinner rack analogy, it's not that they didn't print a lot of copies of the newsstand version of the book. is that when they printed the copies and they hit the newsstand, they put them on the spinner rack. So they put them in a thing. And you know, you've been to a magazine stand at a store where they're stacked up and then somebody folds down the cover to look behind. The second somebody goes like this and folds all the covers, they're all
they're gone. Yeah,
they're over. They're finished. So that was a book, even in 1990, was very, very hard to find at Walmart. And people knew to go to Walmart at the time to try to find those books. So that book is a very, very interesting book. The Gold UPC, there's only 134 9.8s, 112 yellow label 9.8s. There's 5 9.9s, believe it or not, and there's actually 110. Oh my goodness gracious! So
how?
So those books sell. Those books sell for a wide range. They actually, for 134 units, don't come up for sale that often. But again, it's 30 years already.
Yeah.
So that book really sells anywhere from $900 to $2,500. Like there's a big range on Gap. It's a very, very popular book to get signed. It's also a very hard book to get in a yellow label 9.8 because, you know, if you have a blue label 9.8, you want to crack it, put it in a sleeve, get it signed, and risk that it could get damaged, right? Because if it goes down to 9.6, oh my God, you want to jump off the roof, right? So it's a very, very, very tough book. Then the second one that we really need to talk about is the platinum version.
Yes.
The platinum versions, they sent you one per store as a retailer.
Yeah.
So retailer got them out. Now, again, they didn't treat the books then the way they treat the books today, where all variant covers go in a bag and a board. They used to send it in the hard manila folder. So they didn't just throw it in the thing and it got schmutzed up, right? They would put it in those hard manila folders. But still, a lot of 9.2s, 9.4s, 9.6s, right? Because it get bended and folded and the mailman would shove it in your mailbox, whatever. So that book, there's 110 9.8s, 57 yellow 9.8s. That book's about a $1,200 book. That's a great book. Again, another book that's great to get signed, cardstock cover.
Yep.
So it's a thicker cover. It holds up better and it holds up well. And then the third one, you could talk about a little bit about the Chromium series because these were produced years later, 1998. This was the second Chromium cover that they did. And it's called Marvel Collectible Classics. And it's SpiderMan. And it was the second Chromium version that they did. Chromium was all the rage.
Oh, yeah.
Bloodshot one, right? Yeah. Remember all the Chromium covers? And then they did 257 blue labels. There's 166 yellow labels, 9.8s. There's 5 and 5 on the 9.9s. And there's actually 5 10.0s. And that book even sells for $800, which I'm surprised because to me, it's kind of a reprint. 8 years.
It's definitely a reprint, yeah.
But Chromium people love it. So, you know, I know they did some Chromium books and some other stuff, you know. So Todd really was revolutionary, whatever you want to call it at the time. And how did you feel about Todd and his work and at the time, or you actually caught him later on, right?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't when I was buying comics as a kid. I didn't know Todd McFarlane. I just knew that's what Spider-Man looked like. Oh, that's Spider-Man,
funny, right?
That's right. What Spider-Man looks like. I don't know any different. That's what
he reinvented it.
Exactly. And then you see like later on you get the Eric Larson covers and you get just different covers and you're like, oh, okay, it's different artists. I think that's the first time I ever noticed that there's different artists on the book. It's not just one artist, because the Todd McFarlane Spider-Man was just all over the place, posters and T-shirts and just everywhere. And I think the Marvel Collectible Classics, the Chromium covers, I think collectors like them because it's a virgin cover. It's that iconic Spider-Man cover, and they didn't print a lot of those. Those were not highly printed. Those were store books. I mean, the newsstand didn't get those. They were just like, oh, let's just put some stuff out there. Let's put some more Spider-Man comics out there for fans, and people just ate them up.
Right. So before we wrap it up, Alex's pick of the week.
I'm going to throw another curveball and talk about something that I have a terrible affinity for when I'm on eBay, and that's movie merchandise from old movies. T-shirts, that's cool. Posters, that's neat. But I'm into like jackets and hats. There's a really fun, I'll put a picture up. It's Star Wars Episode 1. It's a bomber jacket. And it looks like, it's a specialty store type deal that you had to go to Disney World to get. And it's a Star Wars Episode 1, and it's got patches on the side. I really like that stuff because, you know, when a movie's coming out, and it's not as much as it was now than it was in the 90s. You know, think of Dick Tracy and Jurassic Park. The merchandise for movies, they push so much out there, but nobody's saving stuff like you know, jackets. No one's saving stuff like hats. You know, everybody saves the action figures, but other things, you know, there's also staff stuff. I have a pair of this is my nerd. I have a pair of New Balances that are from the Green Lantern movie with Ryan Reynolds. They were made specifically for the cast and crew. They were given out as presents. I have a pair of those. Never worn them. They're sitting on a shelf. I'll never get rid of them. But it's like neat stuff like that. Like, I'm a Green Lantern fan, so I thought those were cool. And it's, you know, unless you worked on the movie, you're not going to get them.
Maybe if we get Ryan to a show, you'll have him.
I'll definitely have him sign them. 100%.
Have him do a little of this.
Yeah.
A little
That's
of this.
That's it.
All right, cool. So, last two items of the day are both film-related type items. One is the Infinity Gauntlet, which ties in obviously to the Avengers.
Yes.
Infinity War and Endgame. Came out in 1991. There are 1,551 blue label 9.8s and 715 yellow label 9.8s, and that book sells for $350 to $400.
Yeah.
How close is that book to what you see in the film?
There's a lot of stuff that they take from the book. I mean, obviously, Silver Surfer's a big part of the Infinity Gauntlet comics. He wasn't in the movies. It's another franchise.
I know, because it was with the Fantastic Four. It was with Fox.
Yeah, but I mean, that if you're talking about the Infinity Gauntlet in the movie or in the comics, that's the miniseries. That was the one. That was the one where they had all those. I mean, the covers are fantastic. You know, everything that happens in that spawns the Infinity War, Infinity Quest, all that kind of cosmic stuff. A lot of stuff comes out of that book. I mean, the Captain America fighting Thanos one-on-one. I mean, that's taken right out of those comics. I mean, it's one of those books that, even though it was a 90s books and they printed a lot, so much came out of that series that affected the comics and the movies that it's just highly collectible. It's someone, you know, when I was in my, you know, early 20s, anytime I was at a convention, if they had people, a lot of people sell sets. That was a cheaper set back then. You know, you could probably get a set for $50. I'd always buy a set, read them, give them to a friend. Oh, check this out. If you want to know anything about you know, friends are like, oh, Spider-Man comics. I used to read those. Like, oh, have you ever read Infinity Gauntlet? It's everybody and it's everything. It's what really comics could be.
Right. And then the last movie tie-in. Last time we spoke about Carnage appearing in the Venom films, and now we're going to talk about Venom.
Yes.
So in 1995, there was a series, Venom: Sinner Takes All, a popular series. It introduces the first She-Venom. I wonder if there's some speculation there that she might eventually appear.
Probably.
There are 23 blue labels, only one yellow label 9.8. Books sell for $150 to $200. Not expensive. And again, you know, sometimes a character just sort of transcends, right? Tom Hardy took that character and really nailed it, right? I mean, look, he played Bane.
Yeah.
And he was perfect as Bane. He's obviously a great actor. And then he plays Venom, and he did great. And I'm really looking forward to the next iteration. I'm looking forward to seeing Woody Harrelson as Carnage. I'm looking forward to the whole thing. Riz Ahmed was great in the first film too.
Yes.
So it had a lot of great elements to it. So I know we spoke about Carnage the last time. We only touched on Venom a little bit. You know, what do you see going forward with Venom in terms of the movie franchises? Do you think maybe eventually they'll be in the MCU? Do you think maybe you'll see Tom Holland? I mean, what do you think we're going to see out of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you see with the Venom miniseries, and keep in mind, Venom had way more miniseries than he did ongoing. There was a bunch of, you know, 1 through 5s, 1 through 6s. Larry Hama wrote this one, The Sinner Takes All.
Our friend Larry.
That's it. Super nice guy. I think with Venom, when you look at Sony and the Marvel movies, and the hit that Venom was, and what you can do with that without needing Spider-Man. You don't necessarily need Spider-Man for Venom movies. Venom has, you know, the separation anxiety storyline, the Sinner Takes All storyline with the She-Venom. There's so many things you can do with symbiotes by themselves, with him by himself. I think it's a good idea to pick up a few of these miniseries because you're going to see some things They're
Right,
gonna
you
pull
don't know
away from
which
those.
you don't know which characters.
Right.
That's always the trick, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the What If Thor cover, Jane's got the hammer. All of a sudden,
That's
it
it.
goes from a dollar comic to $500,
Yes.
that. The Black Knight, all of a sudden, he's going to be in the Eternals. Kid Harington.
Yeah.
Boom. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's
$600
crazy.
comic to a $1,200 comic.
It's unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
It's crazy. Well, Alex, thank you for another great show. We hope you all enjoyed it. If you have any feedback, please leave it in the comments.
Definitely.
Thank you for sharing your afternoon with us again.
Yes.
And we will see you next week. Same bat time.
Same bat channel.
Thanks,
guys.
everybody.